Emmanuel Acho criminally underrated the Ravens, comparing their 2024 season to potentially that of the 2023 Eagles. We talk about his points, the Ravens offseason in general, and so much more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I am your host here, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, and we're here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen every day as well. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms, so that includes video form on YouTube. You can like and subscribe, and also in audio form wherever you get your shows, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We have you covered over there as well. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel, and with FanDuel, as playoffs wind down, the sport stops sportsing like you want them to. But this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone all day, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. FanDuel, make every moment more. Today, we have Reeta Hubbard back with us today from 105.7 The Fan. Reeta, I'm really glad to have you back on the show. And I know training camp is just a couple of days away. We've almost made it. This has been a long and grueling off season, but hopefully you're as happy as we are that we almost have football back on the horizon here.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, if you're in the Baltimore area, obviously the Orioles are, taking up your time, but, training camp is here. I think that, we still view July, August through essentially playoffs synonymously with football season. So, luckily for us, we can do two things at once. And so we can appreciate the Orioles and still root for them, but we are always excited for training camp this time of year.
Yeah, and I think it feels a lot better to have football and a competitive Orioles team come in, and then you have the rest of just football's back in July. So, Reeta, I know that with all the offseason comes all the offseason talk, and we certainly have seen plenty of it with this Ravens team. Feels like the Ravens are, I don't know if you want to call it the victim of this media talk more often than other teams, especially with Lamar Jackson, which in my opinion is not very fair, but I digress on that point. We had Emmanuel Acho talk a bit about what this Ravens team could potentially look like during the 2024 season. And he ended up talking about how it could look a little similar to what the 2023 Eagles team looked like last season, which we all know how bad of a collapse that was for them last year. But he ended up saying the big point of his was the losses that the Ravens had, where he had the point of Baltimore and Philadelphia, where it was Philadelphia lost all these guys. They lost Javon Hargrave and they lost CJ Gardner-Johnson. And he was apparently, saying, well, look, that's going to impact the Eagles, and ended up impacting them. Baltimore kind of went through that same thing this offseason with, well, you lose Patrick Queen and you lose Geno Stone and you lose other guys. Mike McDonald is on that list as well. And so he said, Clowney matters, Queen matters, Stone matters, McDonald matters. And he said, I don't know if the Ravens should be feared. They'll be good. But he said, I don't know if they're going to be feared. So do you have any thoughts about that, Reeta? Is there anything to you that this team could potentially be?
I don't see Emmanuel Acho's content. I'm going to be honest with you. I think he purposely puts out a lot of things that, to garner views as opposed to facts. However, I do understand the point that he is making because the Ravens did lose a lot. I say that to say, losing Mike McDonald, I think, is big. And then you lose guys like a Jadeveon Clowney, like a Patrick Queen, Geno Stone, which a lot of people, I think, don't necessarily see that as a huge loss. But ultimately, the Ravens have not replaced him with a third safety at this point. And so you don't know what this defense is going to look like with Zach Orr as the defensive coordinator. And it might take some time. Then when you add the fact that there are guys that have a lot of question marks on this defense, like Odafe Oweh, who, although he did play well last year, the pass rush was not there. And that's specifically what people are looking for from an improvement perspective. And then David Ojabo, who has not had the opportunity to essentially play because he's dealt with injuries since being drafted by the Ravens a couple of years ago. So I think it's a fair assessment. And when you look into the offensive line as well, there's 60% new guys on there. And then your left tackle is essentially playing his last year and has dealt with some health issues since 2020. And so you wonder if this team is going to be as dominant as they were in years past. I do think that it's a fair point with everything that I just said. But I think that this where he's selling the Ravens short is that this organization is very built for toughish. You know, they've dealt with a lot of adversity essentially throughout their whole existence, whether it be on the field or off the field, and they've always overcome those adversities. And I'm not saying that, you know, the Philadelphia Eagles didn't. Obviously, I don't know. I don't cover Philly, but Lamar is a 2-time MVP, and you have to assume that he knows what's against him. I'm sure that he doesn't like the way that things ended last year, and the continuing narrative that he cannot win in the playoffs. So I'm sure that all of these guys know that people expect a decline from them, and that they have to, you know, step up and play harder, and essentially win it all. I mean, you know, people might say, well, it's not necessarily a failure if they don't, you know, if they get into the playoffs and make it deep. And I don't agree with that, because you've gotten to an AFC championship at this point. But ultimately, I think the assessment isn't a bad assessment. I mean, they're still going to be good, but I can see the point in terms of, like, are people going to fear them? Now, don't get too cute, okay? Because Derrick Henry is still Derrick Henry, and that's the part that we're gonna not act like that he's not going to be a dominant figure in the backfield, you know. And so now Lamar looks like he's slimmed down, and there's potential zone read options going. I suggest that you don't get cute. I suggest you don't get cute. I suggest that you play the Ravens as if they're the Ravens of any team that you expect. And now they have a chip on their shoulder because they know that they squandered away a Super Bowl championship, and now they have to hush the naysayers up. And I want to go back to something that you said about Lamar Jackson's unfair criticism. Kevin, we have to start recognizing what this is. Lamar Jackson is a guy that gets a lot of clickbait. Using his name gets views, engagements. This is what people want. I don't necessarily think that this is what all people believe when it comes to whatever narrative they push about Lamar. But they know that if they're critical, they can engage with people. Because look at what happened with Mark Schlereth. He argued with people for at least 3 days that I can remember. But guess what? That brought everybody to his podcast. That brought everybody to, you know, to give him engagements that he's looking for. And we have to start being smart about who we respond to when it comes to these things. Now, if you're Lamar, you see it too, and you recognize that they're using your name. Now you got to give them a reason to not. And the only way you can do that is to win a championship. And so hopefully, you know, once he does that, if you got 2 MVPs in the championship, it ain't much left you can say about a guy at that point. So I don't want to say it's Lamar's job to shut them up, because they may never shut up, but it's at least his job to silence his critics a little bit more than as far as them being loud now.
Yeah, and everybody just goes, when you talk about Lamar and people want to use his name in negative light, it's all playoffs. And obviously the step would be, all right, well, if I win a championship, if you're Lamar, if you say I win a championship, what are you going to say about that? Doesn't matter. That is immortality status. She's a champion, and that's what matters there.
Yep.
And I think to your point, Reeta, it is a fair point that Acho makes in terms of the losses not meaning nothing. I think a lot of people have said, okay, well, Geno Stone is the third safety, and Jadeveon Clowney was washed before he came to the Ravens, and Patrick Queen was just a product of Roquan Smith. The losses are going to hurt in some way, shape, or form. Now, the thing that I am kind of like, okay, what are we talking about here, is it feels like the Ravens are being talked about like they've lost Kyle Hamilton, and they've lost Roquan Smith, and they've lost Lamar Jackson, and they've lost Zay Flowers. And it feels like, yes, the losses are going to hurt, and they're going to have to find a way to replicate and replace these guys, or else it's probably not going to go so well for them this season. But to me, the difference between the 2024 Ravens and the 2023 Eagles is it felt like the Eagles lost a lot of guys, and they didn't have enough young depth behind other players. So when guys went down for them, it really stretched them thin.
Yep.
But for Baltimore, they have this plan of, okay, Patrick Queen, there's a potential of him not being here in 2 years. Well, guess what? We're going to draft Trenton Simpson just in case. And then we have another thing with Ronald Darby. He might not be with the team next year. So Now you see he leaves, and then they go out there and they draft a Nate Wiggins and a TJ Tampa. So to me, it feels like for Baltimore, as long as they have Lamar, first of all, they have a chance. But they also still have their core guys. It's just a matter of them being able to get enough replacement value out of the other guys on their roster to make sure that the depth pieces they lost don't come back to hurt them.
Oh, and by the way, they upgraded the running back position. And this is no disrespect because I love Gus the Bus. Everybody knows I was a huge Gus Edwards fan. And J.K. Dobbins obviously just didn't, while he just could not stay healthy when he was healthy, he was great, but neither one of those guys are Derrick Henry. Okay, that's what we're not going to do. The guy he was second in yards last year against a horrendous offensive line with the Tennessee Titans. And while we still don't know how this is going to shake in terms of this new line, you got a guy in Rosengarten who essentially, I believe, can play immediately. And then the guy that they drafted, Voorhees, would have been a second round pick had he not got injured. And he essentially was redshirted. So he should be 100% ready to go come training camp. So I think that, when you look at those types of things, like there's core guys on this team. And while I know Derrick Henry should not be considered a core guy, but he is, because that's what the Ravens do. It's a big part of their offense, which is running the football, right? So, yeah, it's easy to say, oh, they lost their luster, man. They lost an older Jadeveon Clowney. Don't get me wrong. I'm not being disrespectful because I wanted Clowney to come back 110%. I would have loved for him to come back. But what we're not going to do is act like Jadeveon Clowney wasn't in the system in which he was in also benefited him as well as he, and vice versa. You know what I'm saying? And so, again, Mike McDonald, completely understand, because we have no idea what this defense is going to look like. And unfortunately for the Ravens, the first 5 weeks are pretty brutal, and they're going to have to figure it out ASAP in terms of defense. This offense, though, essentially, again, I like the offensive pieces, and I'm excited to see what they'll do. But what they're going to want to do is all the same. It's all going to be the same thing. So, it's I understand it, but again, I just don't think people give enough credit to how resilient this coaching staff and this organization has been since its inception. And I just believe that the Ravens know they missed an opportunity, and I would assume that that's going to fuel their fire even more, particularly going down the stretch.
Yeah, there has been a lot of fuel that the Ravens can use this offseason. And it's not only that, but obviously the AFC Championship loss is going to fuel them a heck of a lot here. And coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about if the Ravens are being underrated and how big their losses actually were this offseason. Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to here on the show. First, this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And for me, I've had a ton of great experiences over on LinkedIn, whether it was networking, finding jobs, looking for anything over there. LinkedIn has you covered. And LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows the small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Push it up for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to push it up for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are back with Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher and Reeta Hubbard still talking with you here on this edition of the show. Thank you to everybody again for being here. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and follow along in audio form for 5 days a week of Ravens content. Reeta, it feels like, again, I agree with you where this year will probably be a bit harder for the Ravens. It felt like last year, once they found their groove, they were just off to the races in the regular season. They obviously dominated Houston in the divisional round. They were dominating good team after good team after good team. They put on statements in prime time, that San Francisco game being the one that I think everybody looks towards. But the AFC has reloaded alongside with the Ravens. You're getting quarterbacks coming back, particularly in this division with Joe Burrow, and depending on how you feel about him, Deshaun Watson, if he can lead Cleveland or not. But that's going to be a block in the Ravens' way of trying to get back to where they were. This is going to be a harder year for the Ravens, I think. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're just a wild card team now, and they're not going to be. They're going to have this huge drop off. Do you feel like all the Ravens are being underrated because of their quieter offseason and the fact that all these players are coming back and there have been flashier moves across the league?
Yeah, I do think that that's a big part of it, right? I think that, Joe Burrow coming back is obviously not a move, but obviously they didn't have him last year, right? So that plays a role. Deshaun Watson, although Joe Flacco did play very well, but then, they've reloaded as well. And they've gotten guys, they traded and got another wide receiver. And, so they're doing their things. Pittsburgh now has Russell Wilson as their quarterback. And so and then you look at what Houston did, and they got Stephon Diggs and some other guys. So yeah, I do think that the fact that the Ravens didn't make moves the way that other teams make moves plays a part into this conversation. And so they're like, well, look at what everybody else is doing around the league to, upgrade this position. And then they lost, Kevin Zeitler, and then they traded Morgan Moses, and, and again, all of those things are valid. But, it's funny because I remember a similar situation where in 2011, the Ravens were 12-4, and they were one of the more dominant teams in the NFL. And then, we know how that ended. They lost the championship game to the New England Patriots. And in 2012, they came back and they were 10-6, and they were fighting for their playoff lives at the end of the season. That Giants game is what and that was late in the season, is kind of what lifted them over. And that could potentially happen, right? But at the end of the day, Kevin, it's yes, the regular season clearly matters, obviously. It's when it counts most. Once you get in the dance is when it's going to matter the most. All the Ravens need to do is get in the dance. Now, I mean, I know it's going to be considered a downfall if they don't win the division, but we have to be realistic. The AFC North is the best division in the National Football League, and it's not even close. Every single team last year was either 500 or above. And so it's not going to be an easy feat. And if they don't win the division, it doesn't mean that they can't win a championship. You want to know why? Because I've seen them do it twice in this organization before. So a third time could potentially be a charm, and you can keep the party going. And again, I'm not suggesting that we should be okay with them not winning the division. I'm simply giving perspective on how hard it is to win this division. And I think that that's something that we need to point out. Then you look at the rest of the AFC. You still got Buffalo. You still got what Houston is doing to help CJ Stroud in his second year. Oh, yeah, Patrick Mahomes got Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. So, it's not going to be easy. It's not. Look, last year was the year. But guess what? Now you just got to work harder. And I fully expect them to do that. I fully expect them to say, we missed our opportunity. It felt like it was a straight shot to Vegas. And we messed that up. But now we got to figure out how to do this right. And unfortunately, yes, you do have a gauntlet of teams that you're going to be playing. But hey, that's the game is the game, is what they say, right? Now you just got to go out and do what you need to do to make sure that you have a playoff berth and handle it from there. And that's essentially it. And I say that because while we sit here and while we sit here and say, oh, regular season, if they lose, let's say, because last year they were 13-4, and then somehow they're 11-6, and we think that the world, or 10-7, we think that the world is ending. Well, I also remember that the Bengals were 10-7. They won the division 10-7, and then they went to a Super Bowl. Now we know they didn't win because we know that they're ringless over there in Cincinnati, and I'm going to remind everybody every single time. However, you got to get in the dance, play your game, do what you do best. And at the end of the day, make sure you get into the dance, because when you get in the dance, the slate is clean. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. We literally watched Kansas City go to Buffalo, which is one of the hardest places to play, and then Baltimore. And that's something that they've never done before. And with Patrick Mahomes. And what did they do? They won. So you just got to get into the dance. And literally that's all that matters.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, we saw Kansas City last year in the regular season compared to what we're used to. That was an abysmal regular season for Kansas City. I know they still won their division.
Worst seasons. One of their worst seasons.
Yeah, we had Patrick Mahomes come out. I think it was a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday, Reeta. I can't remember exactly when. And he said before the Super Bowl run, it was not fun. It was not a fun year for Kansas City. That defense carried them on offense. They went through all sorts of struggles. But you know what? You said it right there. they played the best when it mattered. They got it done when it mattered. So nobody cares how it looked in the regular season because they got their job done. I mean, it's essentially, how do you want it? Do you want the Ravens to look, like the most dominant team in the league and then lose in the AFC Championship game? Or do you want them to squeak in and then go on that run? It's almost better for this organization if they are the underdogs. That's how they played their entire franchise history. I was just
getting ready to say that. I was just getting ready to say their moniker is to be the underdog. So maybe you need to go back to that. Maybe being the top dog ain't best for you. We've seen this happen in 2019, and then we saw it happen in 2023. Maybe being the number one seed is not your thing. Maybe just getting in and having a healthy Lamar, because obviously there's 2 seasons that Lamar didn't finish, where, if you get in the dance, then you can make a run and then you can handle your business. But ultimately, and again, this is not, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that they lose games or anything like that. I'm saying it's not the end of the world if their record isn't comparable to last year. And I don't think, barring major injury, let me be clear, that what happened to Philly is going to be what happened to Baltimore. We literally watched Tyler Huntley a couple years ago keep the Ravens in contention for a playoff spot until the last week of the season. They're not built to go out the way that Philly went out. They're not from an organizational standpoint in terms of the foundation of what they believe in. And I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, to me, Reeta, this is almost like the Lamar Jackson MVP conundrum the first time. What I mean by that is Lamar threw his 36 touchdowns in 2019, and essentially there were 2 ways it would have gone, right? Lamar obviously could have thrown for more than that in 2020, and everybody could have said, oh, he's getting better. But if he did not do that, which we know there was a downtick in statistical production from him, which was widely expected. It was predicted. But because he did that, it was, oh, is Lamar losing a step? Is he regressing? Is this what's going on? If Lamar improved every single year statistically since 2019, Reeta, we'd be talking about him have 70 touchdown passes by now, negative interceptions. Like, it doesn't work that way. So for a Ravens team that did go 13-4, for a Ravens team that was so dominant last season, every year cannot be an improvement on the last year in terms of statistics, in terms of records. There will be some regression and there will be some growth. But as long as you get in the playoffs, like you said, we're just so far past the regular season in this Lamar Jackson timeline right now. We know they can win. We know John Harbaugh can win in the regular season. We have been proven that time and time again.
Yep.
But the Ravens made the championship game for the first time last season since they won the Super Bowl. That was a big step for them. Now they have to continue to build upon that. And that, to me, is one of the biggest things they can do to prove to me that they're continuing on the right direction.
100%. And they know what's ahead of them. I'm sure that they've had conversations ad nauseum about it because they're tired of hearing us talk about it. And I had an opportunity to talk to Arthur Millette not too long ago, and he said it's something that continues to linger with him. He just cannot get that out of his mind, how that ended. And he just feels like they have to be, they have to just continue to stay the course and find a way to have redemption over what happened in January. And so I think that his thought process is probably how a lot of people think, in that locker room and in that organization. So it'll be interesting to follow them and see how that goes for them.
Yeah, we've seen Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Ronnie Stanley, everybody who got up on that podium and who was asked about it said, it still lingers, it still stings. I still think about it. It's in my mind. And that's how the whole team is going to feel. For some of the players who weren't there, like a Derrick Henry, like a Nate Wiggins, they'll certainly feel through everybody else how that went. I mean, Derrick Henry made an AFC Championship game. He beat the Ravens to get there, and he couldn't get the job done. So obviously there is motivation on all fronts for a lot of these guys. But coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk about the potential losses that the Ravens could have, well, the actual losses they had, and potentially how that could impact the team. And then if there are any moves incoming, stay tuned. We got a lot to get to still here on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. In the summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So in the MLB, the All-Star break is ending in a couple of days, and the MVP conversation will continue after that. Gunnar Henderson, and very much so in that. And if you want to go over, check out his odds over on FanDuel, you can do that. Or for the Ravens, they open up as 2.5-point underdogs against the Chiefs. So if you like that line, you can go over to FanDuel as well. Head over to FanDuel and start making the most out of your summer on FanDuel.com. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We return Locked On Ravens with Reeta Hubbard. I am Kevin Oestreicher, rounding out this episode of the show. And Reeta, we kind of talked in that first segment about, they lost Geno Stone and they lost Patrick Queen. They lost Jadeveon Clowney, Mike McDonald. There are a lot of guys who are going to have to find ways to replace and get that production back from. But in your eyes, do you think that it is a player that's going to hurt the Ravens the most that they don't have this season? Or do you think Mike McDonald's going to linger as the biggest loss for the team this year?
I think it's Mike McDonald by far. I think Mike McDonald is the biggest loss. And I say that because, this is Zach Orr's first rodeo in terms of being a defensive coordinator. So he's going to be learning on the job the same way that the players are going to be learning from the job. And look, we know that he's had experience coaching. He's been with the Ravens since he retired unexpectedly due to injury. So it's not that, but it's different when you the main guy with the headset now, and he's going to have to adjust as well as the players having to adjust. And, I think that Mike McDonald was a special guy. I think like many of us are sad to see him go, but you are optimistic that, hiring someone in-house who kind of knows what worked with this defense will implement a lot of similarities of what they already had going for them and what worked for them. I love Patrick Queen. Despite him lying about Baltimore food compared to Pittsburgh food, because no one ever says that. No one ever, even my Pittsburgh friends are like, he's a liar. Yeah. Although we know that. Or it just says a lot about your palate and you need to step your game up. But ultimately, I'm never going to talk bad about the way that he played. I just think some guys get slow starts. And I've always said that about Queen. I think Queen was a little undersized, came into the league and had to make some major adjustments. And when the Ravens knew how to utilize him that worked best with his skill set, he was just fine, And so now you got to figure that out with Trenton Simpson. And now you got to figure that out with, other guys that are on the team. And I think that, it hopefully they don't have too much of a slow start because they're all just trying to put the pieces together and figure out what people's strengths are. But, I think that when you add that with now the new defensive coordinator, it makes things uncertain, right? And, you do look at then Ronald Darby's, because I would have loved to have Darby back. Big fan of his, and then you look at Geno Stone, which, I'm not as, I wish Geno the best. And I think that Geno, for what it was that he was doing, was a very good football player. But I also think that, the defense that he was in, he benefited a lot from, what he was able to do. Right. Yeah. So I think basically what I'm saying in a nice way is that I find him to be replaceable, but the problem is he hasn't been replaced. Right. I think that's the biggest issue. And while Justin Simmons is still out there, or maybe it's Stephon Gilmore, even though he's a cornerback, I feel like you could potentially move him to safety though. We just don't know what that's going to be like. So, the losses are going to hurt, particularly on defense, because they have a new coordinator as opposed to Todd Monken being in his second year. The offense in terms of Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, and, Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman, they're going to have an understanding of what it is that they're going to do. And it's not going to have that much effect on them in terms of the turnover on the offensive line. With the defense, you got turnover, but then you also lose your coach. And it feels like it's going to be a little bit more impactful. But I'm confident in the fact that Zach Orr will do a very good job with these guys, and that, they'll figure that part out. And I think that the biggest question mark at that point becomes, what is the pass rush situation going to look like between Oweh and Ajabo? Because essentially we know what Kyle Van Noy can do, right? But we also have to be honest about ourselves that Kyle Van Noy is a veteran in this league. So the young guys got to figure out a way to step it up. And are they going to be able to do that? Or is that going to essentially be a problem for them moving forward? So I'm more concerned. Yes, I do think that Mike McDonald is the biggest loss. But in terms of personnel, I think we're good, except for potentially what the pass rush is going to look like. And that's the biggest question.
Yeah, this is a young team for the most part. And they have certainly leaned into that youth, whether it be, pass rush, secondary, whatever it may be.
And the coordinator.
Yeah. And it's crazy because Mike McDonald is not old himself.
Right. Yep.
And Zach Orr is over here being even younger than him. But I feel like you're exactly right, where essentially when you have this young group, coordinators, players, and whatnot, and you're a contending team, you usually, if you're, let's say, you're rebuilding, you have a lot of runway for those guys to say, all right, you make a mistake, that's okay. This is a learning opportunity. We'll figure this out. And you have essentially the whole year if you're rebuilding. For a contending team, if there is a mishap or a mistake, or you start losing games because of something, how much of a runway is there, essentially, is the process. So, for example, Mike McDonald, when he was in his first year, obviously we all remember that week 2 Miami game a couple years ago, which was a disaster, and it was a Mike McDonald disaster. Wasn't, just all the way around. But he recovered from that, and he bounced back, and really from that point on, Reeta, the rest is history with Mike McDonald, and essentially I feel like the Ravens feel like Zach Orr could be this next Mike McDonald type of coordinator. So that to me is really encouraging. And by the way, I agree with you. I have no idea.
Well, we don't want that Miami game.
No.
Surface itself, by the way. A couple, big part of that was, Marlon going out, which obviously changed the trajectory of that. So hopefully he doesn't have those types of reality checks. Look, there's going to be some ebbs and flows. It's just going to happen, right? It happens with, I don't know, veteran coordinators. People are going to have lapses of judgment because at the end of the day, they're still human beings, right? But ultimately, you just hope that Zach Orr has been groomed well enough to be put in this position where, his ebbs and flows aren't as drastic maybe as, someone else, because he's been coached. He's been, he's learned from essentially one of the best.
Right. Yeah. And I think the things that he has going for him is he did play the game at a high level for 3 years, and he has that experience. And also he has been around the team. So outside of that one Urban Meyer Jacksonville year, which I'm sure he does not want to remember either, he has been in this organization.
We forgot that Urban Meyer even coached for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah.
Let's it's okay. We wiped that off the board.
It never happened for anybody. Nope. So yes, I think Orr's in a good position. It's just a matter of him being able to get exactly to where he needs to go. And I was saying, I agree with you, Reeta. I have no idea what Patrick Queen was thinking with that Baltimore food, Pittsburgh food. It's one thing.
You don't have to try hard, bro, to fit in. They paid you a lot of money. You don't have to do all of that. You don't have to be the villain. I don't know if you're salty. I don't know. But I wouldn't. You're doing a lot for a team, for a guy, for who the coach once said not so nice things about you, and you said you felt disrespected by it. So, look, if it makes him feel better, I'm good with it. If the reverse psychology works for him, then hey. But we know what you're not going to do is lie on this food around here. You can say whatever you want about the Ravens. I don't care. We're not going to lie about the food ever in life.
I know, and it's like, okay, it's one thing to say, I love Pittsburgh, I love being here, better fit for me, but then you bring the city into it, and I was like, where did this come from? And then he was talking about, like, I don't remember the exact quote, Reeta, but it was like, I'm a fine meat person anyway, and I was like, what is a fine meat?
I don't even know what that means, because they have steakhouses here. Maybe that's your problem. So
I have no idea. And the thing about Queen too is you talked about his expectations, and I think a lot of that came from, first of all, he was drafted in the COVID year, and they had no workouts. I think you and I have talked about this before, but also it's about who the second franchise pick in this franchise's history was, and that is Ray Lewis. And there will always be expectations on first round middle linebackers, ones that he did not live up to in his first 2 years in the league before
and undeserving, to be fair, undeserving, sure. Because Patrick Queen was not going to be Ray Lewis.
Yeah.
He was going to be Patrick Queen.
Right.
You know.
That's exactly what it is. And I just think for me, him leaving, it's a void. But again, they are prepared for this. They brought in Trenton Simpson, and hopefully that works out for him. But you got to mention, Reeta, that whether it is a guy like a Stephon Gilmore, Justin Simmons, in that secondary, maybe there could be a move or two. I know there's been, maybe it's an Eddie Jackson, maybe it's a Quandre Diggs. There's still plenty of guys out there.
Yep.
Do you see them making another secondary move, or do you feel just like they're going to lean into this youth? Because it feels like they've been hyping up all of their youth, particularly in the safety position, Ardarius Washington.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it ends up, but I think that they're not giving up on finding a veteran guy to be the third cornerback spot. That's what I would not be surprised if it ends up that way. It just doesn't work out. Like maybe someone's asking for too much money and they don't want to pay it. And they're like, well, we got enough guys on our roster we feel good with. But I think that they've probably are considering it, or at least reaching out to guys and saying like, what's the deal? Like, are we just waiting for training camp to be over? Like, what's going on? And doing it that way. But we know that they've said that they're trying to figure out who the third safety is. So I don't think that the door is closed on bringing in a guy, but I wouldn't be surprised that in the end they don't, and then they just go to their youth and just have those guys figure it out.
Yeah, we know that Eric DeCosta is very proactive in terms of in-season moves and in-season adjustments. It's very different from the Eisen Newsome era. And it's not that either approach was wrong. Obviously, Eisen did it his way and was very successful. Eric has done it his way and has been successful in his own right. But Eric has that, okay, we're going to sign a guy in week 3 and we don't care. Or we're going to go and cut Tim Williams in week 4 and then we're going to bring in everybody and trade for Marcus Peters. He has done that before. So if he wants to roll in with the youth, and then the youth isn't working, and there are probably still going to be veterans, he will find a way. He will find a way 100%. But there is a lot of youth, Reeta. We've talked about it throughout the entire show. Is it too much youth for you? Would you like to see a couple more veterans in here? Not even just at the, you mentioned pass rush as well, but you have guys like Rashad Bateman, who's going to take on a huge role this season. We've talked about Trenton Simpson. You've mentioned guys like Owe and Ajabo, and on the offensive line, this is a contending team. If this hits for them and it works, it could pay dividends 3, 4, 5 years down the line for them, but there is a risk in going with all this youth. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, potentially in the secondary, I think I would like to have one more veteran, and I think that would definitely help. All the offensive linemen that were vets that I would have liked them to have looked into their sign, so that's not going to happen. Look, Rashad Bateman at this point is a vet. He's entering his 4th year. You got to figure it out. I mean, you and Lamar got to figure out your chemistry, and that's just what it's going to have to be. You are no longer a guy that needs to be babied. And I'm not saying that he was being babied. I'm just simply saying that you're the guy now. So, you're the big brother. So you got to figure this out. The same way that you see Nelson Aguilar going over to talk to Lamar, you got to do the same thing. You got to come up and do these things. So from an offensive perspective, I don't necessarily think that the youth movement is outside of the offensive line. And again, the guys that I would have liked for them to had signed for depth purposes are not available anymore. But I'm confident that the guys that they will have will be pretty good. I'm confident in that. I think that the secondary could potentially use a veteran there for that third safety spot. Because you do have a lot of uncertainty at the linebacker position, sans Roquan Smith. And so you want to give your secondary as much help as they can, because this is a passing league at the end of the day. So I would like to see that happen. And I'm with you. If that doesn't happen in training camp, training camp doesn't mean it won't happen in season, because we know Eric DeCosta will move along very fast if he does not like what he sees.
Yeah, he'll be willing, he'll be dealing as long as he sees a need, he'll be going after it. Now, I agree. Bateman at this point is a vet. I 100% agree with you. Maybe I'll say unproven talent is what I'll say.
There it is. He's unproven talent. But look, Nelson Aguilar was in that same position, right? He was a first-round draft pick. He could probably, parallel his story very similarly, in terms of like the expectations that was of him and how he never really lived up to those expectations. But then he comes to Baltimore and then, he had a solid year, so I just think that, this secondary, based on what we know that the Ravens front office likes to do and how important they believe that the secondary is, I think could afford to bring in one more vet. So hopefully, we'll see that. And look, but if they don't, hopefully the young guys ball out. You hope that they, are fast learners and that they understand the assignment and that they have some success early on in the NFL.
Yeah, they're definitely going to need it, especially because this is how they have to build their team for the most part. Hit on your draft picks, hit on your vet mins, especially with Lamar and these other guys on huge deals. And I think also in terms of vets, hopefully one or two, but also you talk about offensive line. You're right. All those guys are gone because everybody needs offensive line, but it's not just the Ravens. Secondary wise, corners, there are still a few, but everybody needs corners. And so it's almost like it with pitching in baseball, Reeta, where you got the Orioles, they need pitching, but guess what? Everybody else needs pitching too. So it's a matter of what's going to go on at that deadline. It's the same thing here. Now, obviously the trade deadline is very far away in the NFL, and that's no fireworks compared to what the MLB is. But
right.
At the end of the day, you're competing with all those other teams for these depth pieces and guys that can maybe take your roster over the top. But Reeta, I appreciate you. Thanks so much for hopping on and talking Ravens with me. Please tell people where they can find you and what you're working on.
Sure. Of course, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at the NFL Chick. Of course, 105.7 The Fan. Myself and Glenn Clark were on Tuesdays, usually at 6:30 to 9, and then Sundays from 12 to 2. I'm also writing now for the Baltimore Beat. So I just put something out recently regarding Jacoby Jones's death and how impactful he was in the organization, but also for the city of Baltimore. So check that out as well. And yeah, that's and here also Locked On Ravens.
That's right. Reeta hops on a lot here on Locked On Ravens. And again, as the season comes along and hopefully the Ravens are winning, Reeta will certainly be back here. Reeta, I always appreciate you. And be sure to check Reeta out. She is everywhere, and the links to all her work in the description down below. Reeta, again, appreciate you. And thank you to everybody for tuning into the show today. Be sure to subscribe, follow along video form and audio form. Coming up, we're rounding out the week tomorrow. More Ravens content here for you. Stay tuned. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.